The bottle of water sitting on your desk right now is likely the most trusted food product in your life. You buy it because the packaging with its pristine blues and images of glaciers or mountain springs signals a level of purity that you assume comes with rigorous, real-time government oversight. But if you turn that bottle around and read the fine print, you'll notice something peculiar. It tells you the volume, the brand address, and the type of water. Compared to almost any other nutritional product, the data density is remarkably low. There's a reason for this silence. What you're holding isn't a water quality report. It's a federal compliance document. There's a fundamental information gap built into the American water infrastructure. It's a regulatory paradox where the water that flows cheaply from your kitchen tap comes with a mandatory, publicly available annual report card detailing exactly what's in it, down to the parts per trillion. Meanwhile, the premium product you pay for can legally tell you almost nothing about its specific chemical composition or recent testing history. This isn't a conspiracy. It's a matter of jurisdiction. Today, we're going to audit the label itself. We'll examine the divergence between the EPA's Consumer Confidence Report and the FDA's Standard of Identity. We'll analyze why a bottle can legally be labeled Purified while obscuring its municipal origins, why the test results for contaminants like PFAS are public record for your sink but private data for your bottle, and how the United States regulatory philosophy prioritizes identity over transparency, especially when compared to the stricter labeling directives of the European Union. This is an analysis of why the most expensive water you buy comes with the least amount of data. To understand why the label tells you so little, we first need to understand the legal mechanism that governs what water is. In the United States, water isn't treated as a singular entity. It's legally bisected based on how it reaches you. If it comes through a pipe, the Environmental Protection Agency regulates it under the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. If it comes in a sealed container, the Food and Drug Administration regulates it under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This distinction isn't merely semantic, it dictates the data flow. Under the EPA's Consumer Confidence Report rule, established in 1998, every community water system in America must deliver an annual water quality report to its customers. If you pay a water bill, you've likely received one. It's a dense technical document that lists the water source. Most importantly, it includes a table of detected contaminants, arsenic, lead, nitrates, bacteria, listing the maximum allowed level alongside the actual level detected in your specific water supply. It's a system based on mandatory public reporting. The bottled water industry operates on the inverse philosophy. The FDA regulates bottled water as a packaged food product, similar to a jar of pickles or a bag of chips. The FDA sets what are called Standards of Identity in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations. These rules focus heavily on categorization. They define what allows a company to print the words spring, mineral, or purified on the plastic. However, the FDA doesn't require a bottle-by-bottle or even year-by-year public disclosure of contaminant testing on the label. The Government Accountability Office explicitly highlighted this discrepancy in its GAO-09-610 report to Congress. They noted that while the EPA mandates public disclosure of contaminants, the FDA doesn't. The practical result is a massive asymmetry in information. When you drink tap water, you're drinking a known quantity with a public record. When you drink bottled water, you're drinking a product where the quality data sits in an internal filing cabinet. The GAO noted that FDA rules require bottled water facilities to retain their water quality test results for just 2 years. Microbiological data stays on file. Chemical testing data stays on file. But that data doesn't have to be printed on the bottle, published on a website, or mailed to the consumer. This creates a scenario where a consumer might switch from tap water to bottled water to avoid a specific contaminant, say nitrates, without ever realizing that the bottled water might contain the exact same level of nitrates, because the label has no legal obligation to tell them. This brings us to the most common word you see on the shelf: purified. In a previous analysis of engineered sameness, we discussed the physical process of reverse osmosis. But legally, purified water isn't just a description of a process, it's a shield for the water's origin. The regulation defines the standard of identity for purified water as water produced by distillation, deionization, reverse osmosis, or other suitable processes. Here's the crucial legislative nuance. If a company takes water from a municipal source, The exact same tap water regulated by the EPA and treats it to meet the chemical definition of purified water, the origin of that water becomes legally secondary to its chemical state. There's a provision in the law that requires a statement like "from a community water system" or "from a municipal source" to appear on the label. However, this requirement is conditional. It applies primarily when the water hasn't been significantly treated. If the water meets the definition of purified or sterile, the municipal source disclosure becomes much less prominent, or in some label architectures, practically invisible to the casual shopper. The FDA's own consumer materials acknowledge this, stating that purification treatments can qualify products to be labeled purified water regardless of the original source. This is why you can buy a bottle of premium branded purified water that originated from the Detroit or Phoenix municipal water supply, and the most prominent word on the label is pure, not Detroit. The regulations prioritize the identity of the final liquid over the geography of the source. The contrast becomes even sharper when we look at how the system handles emerging contaminants, specifically PFAS. Per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, often called forever chemicals, have become the central focus of water quality discussions in the 2020s. These are industrial chemicals used in non-stick cookware and firefighting foams that persist in the environment and the human body. In April 2024, the EPA finalized the first national enforceable drinking water standards for PFAS. They set a maximum contaminant level of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS in tap water. This triggered a massive mandatory upgrade cycle for municipal utilities across the country. It also triggered a reporting requirement. If a city finds 5 parts per trillion of PFOA, they must tell their citizens. The bottled water industry, however, exists in a regulatory lag. Under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the FDA is generally required to align bottled water standards with EPA tap water standards. But this process isn't automatic, and it's not instantaneous. There's a procedural delay. As of the EPA's announcement in 2024, the FDA hadn't yet established a specific standard of quality for PFAS in bottled water that matched the new EPA rule. As of 2025, the EPA has also proposed extending compliance deadlines to 2031, adding further regulatory uncertainty to the landscape. The FDA conducted a targeted survey between 2023 and 2024, testing 197 samples of bottled water. They found detectable PFAS in 10 of those samples. The FDA reported that none of the detected levels would have violated the EPA's tap water standards. But that's a statistical aggregate. It doesn't help the individual consumer standing in the grocery aisle. Because there's no consumer confidence report for bottled water, you can't look up the batch code on your bottle and see if it was one of the 10 samples with detectable PFAS. You can't see if your brand tests for it at all. You're relying on the brand's voluntary internal quality controls. Some brands choose to be transparent and publish this data, others don't. The law doesn't force them to. This creates a peculiar inversion of perceived safety. You might assume the sealed bottle is cleaner regarding PFAS than your tap. But from a data standpoint, your tap water is the only one with a federal mandate to show you the numbers. The bottle offers a promise, the tap offers a spreadsheet. This philosophy of identity over transparency is a distinct feature of the United States regulatory framework. We can see this clearly when we compare American labels to those in the European Union. In Europe, bottled water falls under Directive 2009/54/EC, specifically regarding natural mineral waters. In the EU, the label must state the analytical composition of the water. You'll frequently see tables on European bottles listing the exact milligrams per liter of calcium, magnesium, sodium, sulfates, and bicarbonates. The EU also places heavy emphasis on the stability of the source. The label must include the name of the spring and the place of exploitation. Crucially, it's illegal in the EU to market natural mineral water from the same spring under more than one trade description. Compare this to the US market, where white labeling is standard practice. As we discussed in our engineered sameness report, a single giant bottling plant in California might bottle water for 5 different grocery store brands: Kirkland, Great Value, Kroger, filling them with the exact same water from the exact same municipal source. In the EU's natural mineral water category, this would violate source identity rules. The US system allows for flexibility and scale. It allows a brand to source spring water from a borehole in Florida today and a borehole in Pennsylvania next month, provided both meet the definition of spring water. The label stays the same because the standard of identity is maintained, even if the geological reality is changed. This brings us back to the fine print on the bottle in your hand. What information is actually required? The law mandates the name and place of business of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. It mandates the net quantity of contents, and it mandates the type of water. That's the floor. Everything else, images of nature, stories about purity, claims of crisp taste, is marketing. There's a subtle but critical legal distinction involving naturally occurring substances. The FDA labeling rules generally require the disclosure of added ingredients. If a company adds electrolytes for taste, they must list them. If they add minerals, they must list them. But if the source water contains naturally occurring sodium, naturally occurring fluoride, or naturally occurring sulfates, the company generally isn't obligated to list these in an ingredient panel because they're not ingredients added to the product. They're simply part of the water. This means a person on a low-sodium diet might check a bottle of mineral water, see no ingredients list, and assume it's sodium-free. But if the underground aquifer naturally contained 20 milligrams of sodium per liter, that sodium is in the bottle. The label is compliant because nothing was added. The information gap persists. The regulatory architecture of bottled water was designed for commerce, not for toxicology. It was designed to ensure that when you buy spring water, you aren't getting distilled water. It prevents fraud and categorization, but it was never intended to serve as a real-time chemical monitor for the end user. The EPA's system for tap water was built in the shadow of environmental cleanup. It assumes the water might be variable, so it mandates constant reporting. The FDA's system for bottled water was built in the shadow of food standardization. It assumes the product is a manufactured good that should be consistent. The friction arises because water isn't a manufactured good. It's a natural resource subject to variation. When we force it into a food labeling framework, we lose the granularity of the data. So, how should an observer of industrial systems interpret the label? First, recognize the label as a claim of identity, not a proof of purity. The word purified describes a process the water went through, not necessarily a zero-defect result. Second, understand that municipal source disclosures are often buried or legally exempted based on the processing method. If you want to know if your water is tap water, you have to look for the phrase public water source or community water system. But its absence doesn't guarantee a pristine natural origin. It might just mean the water was processed enough to drop the disclaimer. Third, realize that for contaminants like PFAS, the bottle is currently a black box compared to your tap. If you're concerned about specific chemical thresholds, you can't rely on the packaging. You must seek out the brand's voluntary water quality report, often buried deep on their corporate website, if it exists at all. This analysis isn't a suggestion to stop drinking bottled water. The consistency and safety record of the industry is generally high. But as an analyst of the supply chain, you must strip away the assumption that the bottle tells you the whole story. The label tells you what the law requires it to tell you. It tells you the volume, the brand, and the category. The rest, the specific aquifer, the fluctuation in mineral content, the trace contaminants, the age of the filtration membranes, remains legally invisible. You're paying for the water. You're not paying for the data.